Marriage Before War. A story of love, sacrifice, and honor. There are moments in life that change everything. Moments so powerful that they define who we are, what we believe, and what we are willing to sacrifice. For some people, those moments come quietly. But for soldiers, those moments often come wrapped in duty, courage, and the possibility that tomorrow may never come. This is the story of a man who chose love, and then chose his country. A story about a wedding, a war, and a photograph that came back instead of a soldier. And if stories of courage and sacrifice mean something to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this deserve to be remembered. The small town. In the quiet town of Maple Ridge, life moved slowly. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Children rode their bikes freely. Old men drank coffee outside the local diner. And every Sunday morning, the American flag waved proudly in front of the town hall. For the people of Maple Ridge, the flag wasn't just cloth. It was a symbol. A symbol of freedom. A symbol of sacrifice. And a symbol of the men and women who wore the uniform. Among those men was Daniel Carter. Daniel wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. But in Maple Ridge, he was respected. Because Daniel was a soldier in the United States Army. The soldier everyone knew. Daniel grew up in Maple Ridge. His father had served in the military. His grandfather had served too. So when Daniel turned 18, there was never really a question about what he would do. He joined the army. Not because he had to. But because he believed in something bigger than himself. He believed that freedom wasn't free. And someone had to stand guard for it. When he returned home on leave wearing his uniform, people looked at him with pride. Children stared in admiration. Old veterans shook his hand firmly. Because in their eyes, Daniel represented the courage that keeps a nation safe. But there was one person in Maple Ridge who saw Daniel not just as a soldier, but as the man she loved. Her name was Emily Harper. Emily had known Daniel since childhood. They went to the same school, walked the same streets, and shared the same dreams of leaving the small town one day. But life has a strange way of bringing people closer when they least expect it. Daniel had always been brave. But around Emily, he was just a man with a quiet smile. She loved his honesty, his kindness, and the way he spoke about serving his country with pride. One evening, under the golden light of a summer sunset, Daniel took Emily's hand. "I might be called away again soon," he said softly. Emily looked at him. Her heart already knew what he was about to say. "So before that happens," Daniel continued, his voice steady but emotional, "I don't want to leave anything unsaid." He took a small box from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a simple ring. "Emily Harper, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes before she could even speak. "Yes," she whispered. "Only. Of course I will." The wedding happened faster than anyone expected. Because war doesn't wait. Just 2 weeks later, the small church in Maple Ridge was filled with family, friends, and neighbors. The American flag stood beside the altar. And Daniel stood proudly in his military uniform. Emily walked down the aisle wearing a white dress and holding a bouquet of wildflowers. But more than anything else, she was holding hope. Hope that love would be stronger than war. The ceremony was simple. But every word meant something deeper. When the pastor asked Daniel his vows, he looked at Emily with eyes full of love. "I promise to love you," he said. "No matter where duty takes me. And no matter how far the battlefield may be." Emily squeezed his hand. "I promise to wait for you," she said. "No matter how long it takes." The church was silent. Because everyone understood the weight of those promises. The call. 3 days after the wedding. The call came. Daniel had been ordered to deploy overseas. War had begun. That night, Daniel and Emily sat on the porch of their small house. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Emily said softly, "I knew this day would come." Daniel looked down. "I wish it didn't have to." She placed her hand over his. "But this is who you are. You protect people. And I love you for that." Daniel's voice was quiet. "I promise I'll come back." Emily smiled through tears. "I know." But deep inside, both of them understood something soldiers and their families always know. Promises in wartime are fragile things. The morning Daniel left, the whole town gathered near the bus station. Old veterans saluted him. Children waved small American flags. Emily stood close to him, holding his hand tightly. As the bus engine started, Daniel turned to her. "If anything ever happens," he began. Emily quickly shook her head. "No. We're not saying goodbye." He nodded. "Okay. Then I'll say this instead. I love you." Emily hugged him tightly. "I love you too." The bus door closed. And slowly, it drove away. Emily stood there watching until it disappeared beyond the road. And before we continue this story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because Daniel's story is just beginning. And what happens next will stay with you forever. Thousands of miles away, Daniel stepped onto foreign soil. The air smelled like dust and tension. Helicopters thundered overhead. Soldiers moved quickly. War had already begun. But Daniel wasn't afraid. Because he believed in something. He believed that protecting his country meant protecting families like his own. People like Emily. Every night, before sleeping in his tent, he looked at one thing. A photograph. It was the wedding photo. Emily standing beside him, smiling. And in that moment, Daniel remembered exactly what he was fighting for. Letters from the battlefield. War changes everything. The air feels heavier. Every sound feels sharper. And every moment reminds you that life can change in a single second. For Daniel Carter, the war was no longer just a duty. It was a reality. A reality filled with sandstorms, sleepless nights, and the constant echo of helicopters in the sky. But even in the middle of a battlefield thousands of miles away from home, Daniel carried one thing with him. Hope. And that hope had a name. Emily. The first night in war. The first night in the military camp was quiet, but not peaceful. Soldiers sat around cleaning their rifles. Some stared silently at the ground. Others wrote letters home. Daniel sat on a small metal crate, holding a pen and a piece of paper. It had only been 4 days since he left Maple Ridge. 4 days since he left Emily. But it felt like months. He began writing. "Dear Emily. The desert here is colder at night than I expected. The wind never stops blowing. But don't worry about me. I'm strong. And I keep thinking about our wedding day. Every time things get difficult, I remember your smile. And somehow that makes everything easier." Daniel folded the letter carefully. Then he took out the photograph from his pocket. The wedding photo. Emily in her white dress. Him in his uniform. 2 people smiling, not knowing how soon war would separate them. Back in Maple Ridge. While Daniel faced the battlefield, Emily faced a different kind of battle. The battle of waiting. Every morning she woke up hoping for a letter. Every afternoon she checked the mailbox. And every evening she sat on the porch, looking at the empty road. Because the silence of waiting can sometimes feel louder than war itself. One afternoon, the mail truck finally stopped outside her house. The mailman handed her an envelope. Emily immediately recognized the handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. And when she read Daniel's words, tears slowly filled her eyes. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pride. Because the man she loved was not only her husband. He was a soldier protecting his country. The mission. 2 weeks later, Daniel's unit received their first dangerous mission. Their commander gathered the soldiers inside a briefing tent. A map was spread across the table. "There's an enemy supply route here," the commander said. "If we cut it off, we slow their operations." The room fell silent. Everyone knew what that meant. It meant danger. Daniel looked around at the other soldiers. Some were barely older than him. Some had families waiting at home. But every single one of them nodded. Because soldiers understand something most people never experience. Duty comes before fear. The convoy. The mission began before sunrise. 4 armored vehicles moved slowly across the desert. Daniel sat inside one of them, gripping his rifle. The road ahead was quiet. Too quiet. Suddenly. Boom. An explosion shook the ground. The convoy stopped instantly. "Ambush!" someone shouted. Gunfire erupted from the hills. Bullets struck the metal sides of the vehicle. Daniel's heart pounded. But his training took over. He moved quickly, helping his team secure the area. The battle lasted only minutes. But to the soldiers, it felt like hours. When the shooting finally stopped, the desert became silent again. Daniel looked around. Everyone in his team was alive. But the reality of war had become clear. This was no longer just a mission. It was survival. The letter that changed everything. That night, Daniel wrote another letter. But this time, his words were different. "Dear Emily, today I saw how quickly life can change. War is something people talk about in history books, but being here is different. Still, there's something I want you to know. Every soldier here fights for a reason. Some fight for their country. Some fight for freedom. And me. I fight so I can come home to you." He paused. Then added one last line. "Keep believing in me. Because believing in you is what keeps me strong." Emily's promise. When Emily read the second letter, she pressed it against her heart. Then she whispered quietly, "I'll wait for you." Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. Every letter from Daniel became a treasure. Every word became hope. And every photograph she kept beside her bed reminded her that somewhere in the world, her husband was fighting for something bigger than himself. A message for the viewers. And before we continue this powerful story, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because Daniel Carter's story is not just about war. It's about love, sacrifice, and the kind of courage that deserves to be remembered forever. The most dangerous mission. 6 months into the war, Daniel's unit received their most dangerous assignment yet. An enemy stronghold had been located in the mountains. The mission was simple, but extremely risky. They had to move in during the night, secure the area, and destroy the enemy communications base. Failure could cost many lives. The soldiers prepared quietly. Daniel sat alone for a moment. He took out the photograph again and whispered softly, "Emily, I'll come back." Then he placed the photo safely inside his uniform pocket, right over his heart. The night before battle. That night, the soldiers gathered quietly. Some prayed. Some wrote final letters. Daniel wrote one more. But this letter was different. He sealed it in an envelope and handed it to his friend, Sergeant Miller. "If something happens to me," Daniel said quietly, "give this to Emily." Miller looked at him seriously. "Nothing's going to happen." Daniel smiled slightly. "Let's hope you're right." War does something strange to a soldier's heart. At first, it fills you with fear. Then it fills you with discipline. And finally, it fills you with a strange kind of calm. A calm that comes when a soldier understands that some things in life are bigger than fear. For Daniel Carter, that moment arrived on a cold mountain night. Daniel's unit moved slowly through the Rocky Mountains under the cover of darkness. The moon was hidden behind clouds. Only the faint glow of night vision goggles guided them forward. The mission was clear. A hidden enemy communications base had been discovered in the mountains. If it remained active, it could coordinate attacks against American forces. Destroying it would save many lives. But reaching it meant entering dangerous territory. Every step could be their last. Daniel walked near the front of the unit. His breathing steady. His eyes focused. But inside his chest, something else lived quietly. Emily's memory. The quiet before the storm. The soldiers stopped behind a ridge overlooking the valley. Below them, faint lights glowed from the enemy camp. The commander whispered, "That's the target." Everyone checked their equipment. Weapons ready. Radios silent. The plan was simple. Move down the slope. Secure the perimeter. Then destroy the communications equipment. Daniel looked once more at the photograph in his pocket. He whispered softly, "Just a little longer, Emily." Then he slipped the photograph back into his uniform. The attack. The unit began moving. Step by careful step they descended the rocky slope. Everything was silent. Until suddenly, a spotlight flashed across the hillside. "Contact," someone shouted. Gunfire erupted instantly. The quiet mountain exploded with noise. Bullets cut through the darkness. Daniel dove behind a rock, returning fire. Explosions echoed across the valley. The enemy had been waiting. It was an ambush. In the middle of the chaos, one of the American soldiers was hit. He fell in the open ground between two rocks. Bullets struck the dirt around him. No one could reach him safely. The soldier shouted in pain, "Help!" For a moment, everything froze. Then Daniel made a decision. Without hesitation, he ran into the open. Bullets snapped past him. Dust exploded around his boots. But he kept running. He reached the wounded soldier and pulled him behind cover. "Stay with me," Daniel shouted. The soldier's breathing was heavy, but he was alive. Daniel signaled for the medic. Within seconds the team secured the area. The wounded soldier would survive. Because one man chose courage over safety. That man was Daniel Carter. The battle continued for nearly an hour. Finally, the enemy resistance collapsed. American forces secured the base. Engineers moved in quickly to destroy the communications equipment. Flames lit the night sky. The mission had succeeded. But the cost of war was always present. 2 soldiers were injured. One helicopter had to evacuate them before sunrise. Daniel stood on the mountain ridge watching the fire burn below. The wind blew across the dark valley. And for a moment, he thought about home. Thousands of miles away in Maple Ridge. Emily suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. Her heart was racing. She didn't know why. But she felt something deep inside her chest. A strange feeling. Almost like worry. She walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. The American flag outside the town hall moved gently in the wind. Emily whispered softly. Please keep him safe. Then she held Daniel's photograph close to her heart. Back in the mountains, Daniel's bravery had not gone unnoticed. Sergeant Miller approached him after the mission. You could have been killed back there, Miller said. Daniel shrugged slightly. He would have done the same for me. Miller shook his head with a smile. You're either brave, or crazy. Daniel laughed quietly. Maybe both. But the truth was simple. Soldiers don't fight only for medals. They fight for each other. For the brotherhood formed in danger. And for the people waiting at home. The next evening Daniel sat again with pen and paper. He began writing. Dear Emily. Tonight I'm writing from a place high in the mountains. The stars here look brighter than anywhere I've ever seen. Today was a difficult day, but we completed our mission. Sometimes war feels heavy, but thinking about home gives me strength. Thinking about you gives me strength. He paused for a moment. Then added. When this war ends, I want us to sit on the porch together again. Just you and me. No guns. No war. Just peace. That's the future I'm fighting for. A message to the viewers. And if Daniel's courage and sacrifice touches your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us of something important. Behind every soldier, there is a family waiting. And behind every uniform, there is a human heart. The shadow of fate. Weeks passed. Daniel's unit continued their operations. Mission after mission. Some were quiet. Some were dangerous. But every day brought them closer to the end of their deployment. Daniel began to believe something. Maybe. Just maybe. He would go home soon. Maybe he would return to Maple Ridge. Maybe he would see Emily waiting on the porch. Maybe the war would end before fate had a chance to interfere. But war has its own plans. And sometimes, the most dangerous moment arrives when a soldier believes the worst is already behind him. The last mission. War has a way of testing a soldier when he least expects it. Sometimes after months of fighting. After surviving countless dangers. After believing that maybe the worst is over. Fate suddenly changes everything. For Daniel Carter, that moment arrived on a quiet morning that looked like any other. But by sunset, history would remember his courage. And Maple Ridge would remember his sacrifice forever. The final assignment. Daniel's unit had been deployed for nearly 9 months. Most of the soldiers were already talking about home. Some counted the days. Some counted the hours. Daniel counted something else. Letters from Emily. He had kept every single one. Folded carefully inside his backpack. Each letter carried warmth from home. Each word reminded him that somewhere far away, someone was waiting for him. But one morning, their commander entered the tent with serious eyes. We have one more mission, he said. The room fell silent. The commander pointed at the map. There's an enemy convoy moving through this valley tonight. If we stop them, we prevent a major attack. But it will be dangerous. The soldiers nodded quietly. Danger had become a normal part of their lives. Daniel looked at Sergeant Miller. Miller whispered with a small grin. Looks like one last adventure. Daniel smiled back. Let's finish it. The night operation. That night the soldiers moved into position along a narrow desert road. The moonlight painted long shadows across the sand. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. Daniel checked his watch. The convoy was expected soon. He took out Emily's photograph one more time. The same photograph he had carried since his wedding day. He looked at her smile. Then whispered softly. Just a little longer. He placed the photo back into his pocket. Right over his heart. The convoy arrives. Minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance. The enemy convoy. Trucks rolled slowly along the narrow road. The commander spoke quietly over the radio. "Stand by." The soldiers waited. Every heartbeat felt louder. Then the command came. "Go." The night exploded into action. Explosions rocked the road. American forces attacked from both sides of the valley. Gunfire filled the air. The convoy stopped suddenly. Chaos erupted everywhere. Daniel moved quickly with his team, securing the area. The plan was working. But then something unexpected happened. One of the enemy trucks accelerated toward the American position. It wasn't trying to escape. It was heading directly toward the soldiers. The moment of decision. The truck was loaded with explosives. A suicide attack. If it reached the soldiers' position, dozens could die instantly. The soldiers opened fire. But the truck kept coming. Faster. Closer. Closer. In that moment, Daniel understood something. There wasn't enough time. Someone had to stop it. Now. Without hesitation, Daniel grabbed an anti-tank launcher. He stepped forward into the open road. Sergeant Miller shouted, "Daniel! Get back!" But Daniel didn't move. He aimed carefully. The truck roared toward him. Dust flying behind it. Daniel took one steady breath. And fired. The rocket struck the truck directly. A massive explosion lit up the desert night. The blast stopped the truck before it reached the soldiers. But the shockwave was powerful. Too powerful. When the smoke cleared, Daniel was lying on the ground. His fellow soldiers ran toward him. "Medic," someone shouted. Sergeant Miller knelt beside him. Daniel's breathing was slow. But his eyes were calm. He looked at Miller. "Did we stop it?" Miller nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes. You saved everyone." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. Then whispered softly, "Good." His hand slowly moved toward his chest pocket. The photograph. Emily's photograph. Miller gently took it out. Daniel looked at it one last time. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Tell her," he whispered. Then his voice faded. The battlefield became silent again. The return home. Weeks later. A military vehicle drove slowly into Maple Ridge. People in the town immediately understood. Because there are some sights that everyone recognizes. Two soldiers stepped out. Their uniforms perfectly pressed. Their faces serious. Emily opened the door of her house. She saw the soldiers standing there. And before they even spoke, her heart already knew. The world suddenly felt quiet. The officer handed her a folded American flag. Then he gave her something else. A photograph. The wedding photograph. The same one Daniel had carried into every battle. The only thing that returned home with him. Emily held the photograph tightly. Tears slowly fell down her face. But mixed with the sorrow was pride. Because the man she loved had not died in vain. He had saved many lives. He had fulfilled his duty as a soldier. A moment for the audience. And if Daniel Carter's sacrifice touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like his should never be forgotten. They remind us that freedom is not free. And that behind every peaceful home, there are soldiers standing guard. Months later, Maple Ridge held a ceremony. The town gathered near the same church where Daniel and Emily had been married. A memorial plaque was placed in the town square. It read, "In honor of Sergeant Daniel Carter, a soldier who gave his life protecting others. A hero remembered forever." Emily stood quietly beside the memorial, holding the photograph, looking at the name carved into the stone. She whispered softly, "You kept your promise. You protected everyone. And I will always be proud of you. Love for a nation." Stories like Daniel's remind us of something powerful. A nation's strength does not only come from its weapons. It comes from the courage of the men and women who are willing to defend it. Across the United States, thousands of soldiers stand ready every day. They leave behind families, homes, dreams, all to protect the freedom that millions enjoy. And because of their courage, America remains strong. Because of their sacrifice, the American flag continues to fly proudly. So whenever you see a soldier in uniform, remember the story of people like Daniel Carter. Because loving America also means respecting the brave men and women of the United States Army who protect it. They are the guardians of freedom. And they deserve our gratitude forever.